What about this matter of divorce and remarriage to a second, third, etc. spouse? Does it equate to adultery? We'll examine this in a 7-part series. Adultery literally means to adulterate, and adulterate means to add a foreign substance to. So let's take a look at Genesis 2:24. For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall be joined to or cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Doesn't sound like any impurity there. Now with that in mind, let me introduce you to my good friend Miss Deja Blue. She is a pure virgin, as represented by this ultra clean pure water, Miss Deja Blue. And she happens to meet a fine young man. He is so cool. He is always coming to the aid of young ladies. In fact, his name is, that's right, Mr. Kool-Aid. And he's represented by these ultra clean pure, virgin pure Kool-Aid crystals. And then he pops the big question. Would you marry me, Deja? And sure enough they do. And on their wedding night, they come together. And what do we have? We now have two separate bodies, and yet they are one. Now question, did Deja absorb Mr. Kool-Aid into her body via absorption of his semen? It looks like to me she certainly absorbed those Kool-Aid crystals. Well, with that in mind, Herbert Ratner, writing in Child and Family way back in 1990, it is perfectly well known and universally admitted that the female organism absorbs these spermatic products after coitus, and that these products act on the female in a favorable manner, whereas the lack of them produces physical and psychic disorders. And if you doubt that, you can search on Google, and here are some websites which you can check out to confirm that. Joined together. Truly, Yahweh has joined these two together, physically via the semen absorption. Emotionally, doctors will tell you that sexual bonding is the closest form of bonding known to mankind. Spiritually, the scripture tells us they have become one flesh. And let's look at this one flesh. One in Hebrew, akkad, literally means united, and we could see that in our demonstration. And then flesh in Hebrew is the word basar, a word meaning to announce glad news, rendered as to preach or to tell good tidings. That's a tremendous concept. Isaiah 52 verse 7. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. There's our word again, basar, who announces peace and brings good news, basar again, of happiness, who announces salvation, and that's the word Yeshua, or Jesus, salvation, and says to Zion, your God reigns. We will see more of this good news of salvation later in part 5, as pictured in the husband-wife relationship. Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. When a man meets a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he, for example, Mr. Kool-Aid, writes her, for example, Deja, a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out from his house. And she, speaking of Deja, leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife. Uh-oh. Then Deja meets a handsome young doctor by the name of Dr. Pepper. And they meet and fall in love. And sure enough, they come together on their wedding night. Maybe even 3 or 4 times. And now, are they 2 or are they 3? Does she hold herself? Mr. Kool-Aid and Dr. Pepper? Oh no. Verse 3 of Deuteronomy 24. And if the latter husband, i.e. Dr. Pepper, turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband, again Dr. Pepper, dies who took her to be his wife, then, verse 4, her former husband, Mr. Kool-Aid, who sent her away, is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, since she has been defiled, adulterated. For that is an abomination before Yahweh, and you shall not bring sin on the land which Yahweh your God gives you as an inheritance. Deja Kool-Aid Pepper is now defiled, adulterated, containing two men via their semen and their emotions and spiritually everything else within her. Questions. Will a divorce decree issued by a man who is a judge remove the semen from her body? Will an annulment by the Catholic Church remove the semen from her body? Did the first husband, Mr. Kool-Aid, break his vow of for better or for worse, until death do us part? And did husband number one, Mr. Kool-Aid, cause her to become adulterated, defiled? And the seventh commandment reads, do not commit adultery. In other words, do not be the cause of the adulteration. Let's explore this more in parts 2 and following.